Hello, everybody. This is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today we're going to talk about Ridgely's Delight, the neighborhood here between the University of Maryland Medical Complex and Camden Yards. Before we get to that, I have to say that I am doubly delighted, if I can use that sort of cheesy pun, to be here. First, this is a wonderful neighborhood. It's a great day. But second, I'm pleased to announce that we are expanding our in-person walking tours to include 1-hour guided tours the first 3 Sundays of each month, beginning in May, all the way through Thanksgiving, of Ridgely's Delight here, of Federal Hill, and then of gargoyles and landmarks and lions downtown from the Sunday Farmers Market. So stay tuned. We hope you can join us on one of those. All right, Ridgely's Delight is one of Baltimore's very earliest settlements, but even before its colonial days, it was here on Washington Boulevard. It got its start as a Susquehannock Indian footpath, folks coming and going to and from the harbor. And I'm not going to be able to talk about all of the history here. I'm going to focus on 3 things: Washington Boulevard, the footpaths, wonderful little footpaths here, and then the bed and breakfast behind me called Rachael's Dowry. So from a Susquehanna footpath, Washington Boulevard grew. The neighborhood got its name dating way back to 1667, so more than 100 years before the Revolution. A gentleman named Colonel Ridgely married a woman named Rachael Howard, that same Howard family that gives us Howard Street and so much else in Baltimore. And Rachael came with a dowry. Her dowry included the land that we're standing on right here. It wasn't called Ridgely's Delight back then. It was called Howard's Timberneck, a really great name. So the Ridgely family owned it for a number of years. By the 1730s, they had acquired more property. They bought another piece called Brotherly Love. This neighborhood has great names. Brotherly Love, and then had it resurveyed and named Ridgely's Delight. Ridgely for the family, and Delight because, well, who knows? It is delightful. And things didn't really get going development-wise. They started leasing out parcels, but it didn't really get going development-wise until around 1800. And the earliest houses in the neighborhood still date from right around that era, including the one behind me. Washington Boulevard has always been the main drag. In fact, it was the main north-south road to Washington. That's got its name, Washington Boulevard. So if you're going from Baltimore to Washington or New York to Washington or wherever north to Washington along the coast, this was the road that you used. And by about 1900, the neighborhood really was humming with development. And Ridgely's Delight has some of the most diverse types of buildings in it. It's got fancy houses, 3 stories here along Washington Boulevard. It's called Professionals Row for the doctors and lawyers and dentists that were here, as well as industrial buildings that were serving the B&O Railroad. The B&O Railroad yards are just a few blocks west of here. And then smaller houses for workers at the harbor and elsewhere at the B&O. A really neat mix. And in fact, the 2 sort of anchors that got this neighborhood going were the University of Maryland Medical School that was started in 1812, and then the B&O just about a decade later. So things are going well. After World War II, however, things turned southward a little bit, like many neighborhoods in Baltimore. Jobs were disappearing and people were moving out. But by 1973, the neighborhood was squarely part of William Donald Schaefer, Mayor Schaefer's Dollar House program. We should do a whole video on that. But in a nutshell, the city found itself owning dozens, maybe 100+ houses that it wanted to not be the owner of anymore, and sold them off for $1 to home buyers who pledged to put in serious money, I think $20,000 or more, and then live there for a number of years. And so the vacants here in Ridgely's Delight that had been owned by the city turned into wonderful family owner-occupied houses. All right, I'm going to blow through my 5 minutes here too quickly on Washington Boulevard. Let me turn for a second to the footpaths that are here. Some of us may be familiar with the footpaths in Roland Park that were part of the Olmsted design, the wonderful nature winding footpaths behind the houses, or the paths in Columbia, Maryland, the planned community there as well. Or if you've been to England, you can travel the rights-of-way footpaths in small villages and even between villages among the sort of sheep pastures you can wander through. These are very similar. They're little footpaths, pedestrian only, behind the houses, almost like cut-throughs between blocks. and they are not as long and windy as Roland Park or Columbia, and I don't think they have sheep on them. But when you are on them, and we do go on them in our walking tour, you definitely feel you're part of 200 years of folks cutting through, getting to and from here in the neighborhood. All right, finally, let me turn to the building behind me, Rachael's Dowry Bed and Breakfast, and we know where that name comes from. Remember Rachael Howard, who got married to Colonel Ridgely? That's the Rachael, and her dowry was part of that original 1667 land. The building was built right around 1800, maybe a few years before, 1798, 1799, by a gentleman, and let me make sure I get his name right, Michael Warner. Warner was a brick baron. Somebody had to make all those Baltimore bricks, and he was one of those somebodies. He became very rich and traveled in high circles. It said that he hosted Martha and George Washington here a number of times, which could make sense. George, obviously, going from Washington up to Philadelphia and New York, this is where he'd traveled. There is a story that he spent a number of years here recuperating from breaking his arm, falling off a horse. I need to dig into that one a little more to make sure, but we do know that for a long time there was a statue here of George Washington with his arm in a sling, so maybe that's true. The building turned into a bed and breakfast in 2007, and in 2011, we gave it a Historic Preservation Award, we at Baltimore Heritage. And I will say, if you have friends and family coming into town for any reason, and they want a really interesting, wonderful place to stay, have them check this out. And I am not saying that just because the folks here, Linda and Jacob, give me cookies every time I come by. It is a wonderful place. All right, I'm going to wrap up and say thanks so much for joining us, and we hope that you can join us in person on one of our Sunday morning walking tours. We'll see you next time.